want to continue working on Firefox Focus with you, and we started this last week. This is our in-progress pull request, and we are migrating Focus over to use one of our Android components that live in this repository. If you don't know Focus, let me quickly explain it. It's a privacy browser. You can use it to browse some websites, and at the end of your browsing session, you press on this little trash can icon and your browsing history is gone. So it's great for one-time browsing, and it blocks trackers and has other privacy features. And let's talk about our components quickly. We've built a bunch of Android components that you can use to build browsers or browser-like applications. Our newest apps like Firefox Preview are using those Android components already. And Focus is a little bit older and doesn't use those components, or not all of them yet. And there's one important one that I'm working on getting into Focus, and that's the engine component, which allows you to use WebView or our own engine GeckoView in an app. And once we get this component, and we can use a bunch of other components that depend on an engine. All right, and we started ripping out all the old code, commenting it out, removing it, moving in the new code, and it's kind of working again. As you can see, we can browse, but there are a bunch of features that are still broken, and we need to fix them step by step. And eventually the whole browser is going to work again. So in this PR, there is a list of things that I know that are broken, and we basically just need to burn down this list. If you are interested in seeing any of this code, like in the description of this Twitch channel, there should be links to all the repositories. All right, so to start, we just need to pick something from this list. Let's see. Maybe we could start with looking at erasing browsing history. As I showed before, when you press this trash can icon, the history is erased and you start fresh with a fresh browser as if nothing has happened. And it looks like this is still happening, but under the hood, I think this is broken, since the old code that did this, we removed it, and we need to use our new engine component and talk to the new engine component and tell it to please remove all the things. So let's start by finding where this is actually handled. There's an erase button click handler here, so I guess we start somewhere in on click. Okay, let's see. Erase calls into the erase function. If Firefox can focus, why can't I? Yeah. Yeah, so previously we called cleanup. Initially, Focus had its own kind of abstraction on top of WebView, because we migrated it over from WebView using GeckoView, our own engine. And back then, Focus used to call everything on the view, because that's the only thing how you can interact with the engine if you are using WebView. Now we no longer need to do this, because in our engine component, the engine is like a global thing that exists always, no matter whether you are currently showing a tab or browsing UI or not. And so we do not need to go through the view anymore. And this is what this old code did. So nowadays we can call require components, which is an extension function that will get the components singleton basically from the application object. And then we have access to the engine object. And I actually do not remember how we can do things here. A clear data, for example, looks super interesting. Might be what we need. Clears browsing data stored. Yeah, that looks good. And we can also take a look at the previous code here in the Focus repository, because in my local checkout, most of that is already removed. And we should find something like maybe GeckoView provider, which returns a Gecko WebView. And then we can see what is this inside this Gecko WebView. Yeah, the class is defined inside this provider class, which makes it not that readable, but we will find it. We saw that previously the code called cleanup. So let's see what this code did in its GeckoView implementation. Cleanup. It closed the Gecko session. I guess the reason for that is that GeckoView actually has the concept of private sessions, like in your browser when you open a private tab. And WebView does not. It used to have it in the past, but it doesn't have it anymore. So in the WebView implementation, we needed to remove all those stuff ourselves. Nowadays, we can just rely on GeckoView by telling it, please always create a private session. But nevertheless, we could look at clear data and see if there are other data types that we want to remove that might survive even a private tab. I don't think there is any, but let's just check. Cookies, network cache, image cache, DOM storage, sessions. Yeah, technically it looks like we do not. Let's double check whether we are actually opening a private session though. Let's see, I think this might happen here in URL input fragment. That is the fragment that you're actually seeing right now. Once you're in this mode where you can enter a URL into the toolbar. Let's see, there should be something like a commit method, I think. Yeah, that's whenever you enter a URL and press enter, for example, or this go button here on the keyboard. Okay, it checks the input, whether it's a search that we need to perform or URL we need to open. And then we go into this class. There are two modes. Like in this mode, we already have a tab open and we basically change the URL it's pointing to. Or there's this mode where we are here and there's no tab yet. And we are interested in this mode here, down here, where we are creating a new session. So it looks like currently we do not set the private tab here. The session should have a private flag here, private true. But let's remove this for a second and let's find a website where we can actually test this. Maybe we can find some cookie test page. Okay. Wasn't a good page. Maybe MDN has a good sample that we could use. Let's see. Basically, I want to find a test page that changes whenever we visit it, and where we can see whether we have visited it before or not. so that once we erased browsing history and go to this page again, it should look like we have never visited this page again. I seem to have problems finding a good page. Usually if you search for some web APIs, you immediately find some great pages where you can test those APIs, and then there are also great test pages if you're building a browser. Browser cookie test page. Online cookie checker. This page can be used to test your browser cookies related settings. That sounds like... Oh, unfortunately it's not web optimized. Number of cookies. Yeah, that is not a great page on mobile. Let's see if we can find another one. No, this one checks cookies on a website. Are cookies enabled in my web browser? That sounds like a great page. Yes. Well, yes. Well, that's not enough. Yeah, cookies are enabled, but we want to see if they persist once we create a new browsing session. Okay, this is harder than I thought. Where could we test this? Of course, you could try logging into some pages, and after erasing the browsing history, you should no longer be logged in, but I don't feel like logging into pages while on stream. So let's try to first find another page, and maybe use this ugly page that wasn't really readable. Not this one. This one. How do I actually perform like a pinch to zoom inside the emulator? Does anyone know in the chat? Guess I could try this plus button here. Okay, number of cookies. Let's set a cookie. Did it actually do anything? Yeah, I'm not sure if this page is actually working. Let's reload this page and try again. Set test cookie. No, this page doesn't do anything at all. Browser cookie test page. We find so many pages that check websites instead of whether your browser supports cookie. You could go to a page like gitlab.com and dismiss the cookie bar. That is a great idea. Let's try that. GitLab. And there are probably a bunch of others like The Verge, I think. Okay. I don't see a cookie banner here. see the Verge. Where's the page? Still loading. Let's start over. The Verge. Okay, there it is. I don't see a banner. Like by default, Focus also blocks trackers, and maybe like on this page alone it blocked 50 trackers. It's definitely possible that we now block the code that actually shows the cookie banner. No. Man, those cookie banners are on every page, but if you need it, then... Well, there might be... Actually, since we are not... We have been on the Verge before. Like a couple of days ago, I think I tested on the Verge too. So maybe we already have this cookie. And as I mentioned before, I think right now we are actually storing data. So let's quickly clear the app data. Okay. Okay. And we go to the Verge. Ah. Thank you for following. Okay, we finally got a cookie banner on the Verge. And if I accept this banner, I delete all my browsing history, and I go back to the Verge. Then, yeah, the cookie is still... The cookie banner is still not showing up, so I assume... And that's also how it looks like in the code. I assume that we persist data at the moment. And let's go back, erase the storage again. So step one is whenever we create a session here, and we need to figure out if there are other places where we do this, we set the private flag to true, because we only ever want to have private tabs in Focus. That's its main feature. All right, let's go ahead. The Verge. Hey, here's the cookie banner again. I accept the cookie banner. I delete the browsing history. Now I go to the Verge again. Hey, the cookie banner is here. Awesome. So this time we always start fresh. That is good. Let's go back to the place where we handle the erase button being pressed. It was somewhere in here. Let's make the emulator smaller again. Erase. So let's remove some code. We no longer need this view reference here. We no longer need to call things on the view here. And in theory, we don't need to tell the engine to clear any data, because at this point, At this point, the session is already closed, so there should be no longer any data around in a private session. We could leave a note here and double check. Do we need to clear more data here? And then we can also call into clear data here. Engine dot, okay, to fix the import. Engine dot browsing data and then all. But yeah, looking at this list, I assume all of those things are somehow already covered by a private tab. Well, let's add this to our to-do list. On clear data, do we need to clear more data than what the private tab kept? Okay, cool. Let's... Did I deploy this already? Let's try this once more while calling this clear data call. Okay, we go to the Verge once more. Here's the cookie banner. And then we delete and do this again. Awesome. And there's the cookie banner. And if I accept the cookie banner and reload the page, yeah, then it does not show up. Yeah, that looks good. Now I delete once more because it's always nice when things work. Yeah, there's the banner. All right, awesome. So let's also double check all the places where we create sessions. I'm not aware of other places, but there might be other places. This is definitely the obvious one in the URL bar. Whenever you type something and there's no tab open, we need to create one. Okay, there's the help page. This is if I go to, is it via settings? Oh yeah, there's a help tab here. And what's the other one here? Help trackers. I think that's when you click on this little button here that explains you what this means. And I think it makes sense to open those pages in private tab too, because you could now continue browsing here and go to the Verge, and then you still want this to be in a private tab. Okay. Where else are we using this? This is the browser fragment. There seems to be a situation where we handle not having a session. So a session, by the way, is a tab in the browser. And the browser fragment usually gets launched with an ID of a session. And our session manager has all the sessions, and then we look up the session by the ID we got in this browser fragment here. And if there's none with this ID, we just create one that points to about blank, which is like a white page in almost any browser. Yeah, looks like this. I'm not sure if we are actually running into this case. Maybe there's a funky situation where we restore the Android process and for some kind of reason we are still on this session or on this fragment, but we can't find the session anymore. I'm not sure. But the safe way is definitely to also add the private tab, private flag here too. And I think like it would make sense to somehow tell the components or whatever, like I always want to have private tabs so that I don't need to provide this every time here. I think that would be interesting to do. But for now, let's find the places where we create sessions and make sure they are explicitly private. There's a what's new link, and I assume we don't see this here because this local build is not a new app or new version from the store, but we should open this in a private tab too. The reason, by the way, why this is not already in the code here is the custom implementation of Focus. Whenever I told the engine to actually open a tab that we can render, back then it told Gecko to always create a private tab. But now, since we introduced our engine component, the component will take care of creating those engine sessions. And so we need to tell it via the session object how to configure our engine sessions. And so now, since we use the component, now we need to make sure we actually create proper sessions with the right configuration. Okay. Set suggestions. Okay, that is probably, if I start typing here, I can say yes, and then I get a bunch of search keywords here from Google back based on what I typed, and if I click on one of those, they should be in a private tab too, obviously. Okay. Then we enter the intent processor. A browser handles a bunch of intents, like clicks on links in third-party apps as the most popular one probably. And yeah, we create a bunch of sessions here too, like if we get a URL, this should be in a private tab. If we get just some text shared, then we perform a search, and that should be in a private tab. Then this could be a custom tab where we load a page for a third-party app and look like the third-party app. And there's another create session method. Also create sessions. They should always be private. And it already feels like we should create some kind of helper that creates sessions. Because otherwise, yeah, we always need to copy our configuration over to wherever we create sessions, and that is error prone. And if we add some kind of other flag in the future, then we need to do the whole thing again. We actually used to have such a helper in our Android components, but for our new browser store. So Right now, Focus uses the session manager. It's the old kind of way how we manage sessions. It has some problematic aspects. So we wrote a new version, Browser Store, and we have a way to keep them in sync and use both in an app. But we haven't fully migrated to the new thing yet. So we can't use the new fancy stuff just yet. So after we've migrated Focus over to this engine component, we can look into actually using all the other fancy things. And now I think I closed the tab. Yeah, let's go back to who creates session objects and see if we find more. Help trackers. This is the button over here. I thought we just did this, but apparently we forgot to actually. Oh no, we did. Sorry. I now added the parameter to the wrong line. Yeah, here we did it. And then there is another one here, report site issue. If for some kind of reason a page doesn't look like it should in Focus, then people have the option, I'm not sure if it's in all builds, but in some, like nightly, report a site issue, and this goes to webcompare.com, and then you can explain what's wrong, and then they will try to figure out why it's wrong, if it's the browser or the page. And that should be in a private tab. And this was again the wrong line. Okay. Yeah, actually, I did this in so many places now. I think we should create a helper now. Because this also makes it easier, then we can find all the places that create a session, and we should only find our helper, nothing else. Let's see, is there already a nice place where we could put this? Utils. Oh. Well, it doesn't matter that much where we put it right now. Once this is in a state that we could maybe potentially commit it, then we can go through all this and clean it up, move it to the right places. For now, I will just create a tab utils class, I guess, and just a function in here, create tab. It creates a session. That will also come in handy later when we switch from the session manager to our new browser store, because then we can just return the new type here. It's no longer a session then. Okay, we need to pass in at least a URL. And then we always set the private flag, and then let's see. Let's go back to all the places. Help. Okay, we need to at least pass in a source too. The source is basically describing why did we open this tab, where is this coming from? And we use this in a couple of places to decide what to do in certain situations, or when we send telemetry. And yeah, so we need to pass this to our session here. Let's see, now we should be able to replace this code here. We create a tab now. And this means we no longer need this private flag here. Okay, continue. Create tab. Let's remove all the code we just wrote. all the private flags. This one. Okay, there are situations where we do not have a source or do not provide a source, so let's handle this here too. In this case, let's use the same default as in session, which is source none. Okay. Now this is no longer required to provide. And here's another session. Place it with our create tab function. Here. And where it's intent processor that we just worked on. Create tab, create tab, create tab. Remove the private flag again. Here as well. Okay. Let's see, settings. It's like we have some kind of learn more links in settings. And there's some here. And okay, there's a tip manager. Let's replace all the session constructors with our function. We'll take care of creating the session in the way we want them in Focus. Open default Sumo page. Okay, so I think that was all I've seen. So let's go back to our helper. Let's see who is creating sessions in this code. New instance creation. Okay, there's one we missed in your input fragment. And if I check again, new instance creation. So we now see that only inside our tabutils function we are actually creating a new session. All right, that looks good. And with that, I think we can check off erasing browsing history. We still have this new to do that we look at the clear data calls. But just making sure this erase button works, we did this part. So awesome. One less. What's the next thing we could work on? If you have joined in the meantime, we are working on Firefox Focus, a privacy browser. We are trying to get this engine component from our Android components project into Focus, replacing the custom code that existed in Focus and getting it onto the same code base as other browsers. And yeah, then we have a shared code base, and we can also use other components that depend on this component existing. Okay. Maybe add to home screen. That might be a quick fix as well. And if you go, well, let's start fresh. You go to a website, again, like The Verge. And now we will always see a cookie banner. You can go to the menu and select Add to Home Screen, which currently does nothing, but it should create a home screen shortcut, and whenever you press this shortcut, it should open the website in focus. So kind of like a bookmark, but on your home screen. And I assume when we moved in the engine component, we probably just commented out some code. So let's see. We can find it. Here's show add to home screen dialog, which is not used anymore. Okay, this looks like the on-click handler for add to home screen. We need to get the URL and the title to call this method that shows the dialog. Previously, as I mentioned before, we looked at the view. Since we, at least in the very first versions of Focus, asked WebView for the URL and the title of the current page. And now we have this fancy or nicer session object that just gives us the data, and we can just use this here to call this method session URL and session.title. And the things we did previously, we can just remove this. Okay, let's see. Maybe this was already everything we need to do at home screen. Okay, let's go to The Verge, our new test page for today. Cookie banner still showing. Add to home screen. Okay, we see the dialog. Now with the title, let's add this to the home screen. This is now the Android UI. Yeah, let's add this to the screen. Go to the home screen. Yeah, there it is. Okay, let's go back to Focus. Remove the session. So kill the app. Now let's click on this shortcut. And yeah, it's now a quick way to go to The Verge. And yeah, the cookie banners are super annoying now. Because yeah, it's a feature that we don't save any browsing history, so now they come up all the time. But I think let's go down this rabbit hole for a second. I think there is a feature request. Block EU cookie banners. Yeah, usually, at least in the EU, you see them all the time. And yeah, there are block lists. Okay. The nice thing about getting Focus to use GeckoView and our components is that with that we can integrate our web extension component too, and then we can allow web extensions like ad blockers and also cookie banner blockers. So once this is done, we could easily integrate web extensions and then allow users to use extensions that, for example, block those at times annoying cookie banners. Okay, it looks like we already implemented add to home screen with that, or made it functional again. So that was a quick one. What's the next thing? Warmup Engine. We actually looked at this on one of the other days. And there's the application object, Focus application. And yeah, here it is. The warm-up call, it's still commented out. We had a problem back then because we did it in all processes and not only in the main process, and we actually changed this last time, so I think now we can just comment this back in. The thing this is supposed to do is when you launch the app, let's actually do this. Okay. This is the app when you launch it, and there is no browsing happening yet, but we can already start Gecko now, our browsing engine. And what this does is then, once I start actually loading a page, Gecko is already running, and then it can immediately fetch the page, render the page, and so on. And we save some time. Otherwise, you enter URL, and then we will need to start Gecko first, and then it can do all its thing. So it's just a nice little optimization while you're on this screen that doesn't need the browser yet. We can already start it in the background. Yeah, so let's just comment this in. And we can also try looking at the log, because then we should see Gecko start. Okay, let's use pitcat for that. Okay, this is all the old log. Now we start Focus and go back to the log. Yeah, we already see here a Gecko thread, Gecko runtime, and so on. Yeah, so it's doing things in the background, launching. And yeah, that's all we wanted to do here. So that was a quick one as well. What's the next thing? And yeah, by the way, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat, and yeah, I'm happy to answer the questions too. Especially, yeah, about this project, about Focus, about our Android components. Yeah, whatever's interesting to you. I think the tracking protection policy is maybe something we could look into now. And for that, we need to go to the engine provider. Oh, and while I see this to do here, I think this is missing on our list as well. Integrate crash reporting, or reintegrate crash reporting for the engine. So whenever Gecko crashes or some of its processes crashes, it can tell us, and there's a component that can handle those crashes, and yeah, we just need to reintegrate this. But let's continue with a tracking protection policy. Let me show you what this means. In Focus, we block trackers or sometimes ads that are tracking people, and if I go to the Verge, I can see this counter here going up, and those are all the trackers we are blocking on this page. So 30, 32, and still going up, 50, 54 trackers. Oh, that's a lot. And you have the option to disable this here. Like sometimes a page is broken and then you might want to temporarily disable this. But what's more interesting maybe is that you can configure this. Like there are right now 4 categories here where you can block ad trackers, block analytic trackers, social trackers, and other content trackers. And depending on which kind of things I turn on and off here, we need to tell the engine to actually do this. And there are 2 places where we need to do this. One is when we launch the engine. Then we need to tell it, okay, this is the configuration you should use. And the other one is whenever I go to settings and change the configuration, then of course we need to apply those changes. So let's see how we are going to do this. The initial state where we create the engine, this is the place where we can pass in a tracking protection policy. And last time we just hard-coded this here to strict, which is just one subset or one combination of all those different things. And now we need to, like the to-do says here, do this based on the settings of the user. So let's look at Focus, at the old code first, because I'm curious how we mapped the settings that exist in Focus and where do we get them from to what GeckoView expects. And then we need to not translate this to what GeckoView expects, but what our engine component, which is like an abstraction on top of that, expects. And I think that happened in this Gecko WebView provider class, maybe. Let's see. Yeah, here we are setting some runtime settings. Okay, let's quickly copy this over into a comment so that we can see this in context here. We enabled safe browsing for malware and phishing sites. I'm actually not sure if this exists here. Let's see, content. No, I don't see this. This is probably part of the policy. Maybe, is it? Do we have safe browsing here? No. Let's add this as a separate to-do because I only care about the tracking protection now, but safe browsing is something we should look at too. Set safe browsing settings on engine. And then it used some content blocking builder. That might be the class we are interested in here. Content block builder. Oh no, that is actually the thing that enables safe browsing. Yeah, that's the wrong thing. Let's see, where do we create a Gecko session? That is maybe the thing we need. Let's see, where was this defined? Create Gecko session. Okay. This, yeah, this used to be the code that, by the way, always enabled private mode for a Gecko session. Suspend media, okay. But I still don't see where we set the policies. Let's search for policy. That's strict mode. Interesting, I can't find the code. Did we ever do this correctly? Let's see what happens if we go to settings and change what our policy is. That is privacy and security. Is this something? Okay, there's a privacy security settings fragment. And let's see what happens when we change any of the trackers. Okay, I don't see this being handled in here. Maybe there's preference listener that listens to those changes. Let's see. Oh, interesting. There's one in the Gecko WebView provider. And the Gecko WebView itself listens to preference changes. On shared preference changed. Okay, so whenever some settings change, it used to call things on the runtime. Okay. So whenever one of the switches was flipped, it called update blocking. Update blocking. Yeah, so this is the thing that maps the settings to the content blocking policies and then sets them on the runtime. So that is what we want to do whenever we create the engine, and then we need some new code that does something like this and updates the blocking lists whenever we change the setting. Not sure where this is going to live. Could maybe do it in the provider too. Let's see. But for now, yeah, for now, let's take this code over to the engine provider. $54, barely even trying. That's the trackers on the Verge. Yeah, interestingly, loading tracker intensive pages, and Focus is usually faster because, yeah, all those requests are getting blocked. Okay, so when we create the runtime here, we have already this Gecko runtime builder. And now we could maybe create something like we had in the old app. One that create anti-tracking policy. And let's see. Or let's move to somewhere else. We don't want to interact with Gecko directly. We want to do those calls on our component that wraps the Gecko code. Because if we want to use other versions of GeckoView, then we still want to have this working without adding this to any engine provider that we might implement. So let's do this here instead. And then we need to create this in a more generic version. But for now, let's create such a function here. Create anti-tracking policy. And let's see, what does this like? What's the type it expects? It's a tracking protection policy. Okay, in this case, let's rename this to create tracking protection policy. And instead of returning strict here, we call create tracking protection policy. Okay. Okay. I think that it's good. Yet now let's move to Phoenix. Firefox Preview. I want to double check when Phoenix creates those. They have this, yeah, tracking protection policy factory. Get custom tracking categories. That's what we need to do too. Okay, we can, that's the call I was looking for. We can call tracking protection policy select. And then we provide a list of categories and a cookie policy. I do not care about the cookie policy right now, but what are values we can provide to this? Accept non-trackers, accept none, accept all. Is this actually a setting we support here? Yeah, there's a block cookie setting. So we need to actually map this setting to a cookie policy too. And to not do all of that at once, I will just add this to our to-do list here again. Create cookie policy, or create and update cookie policy. The user can change this in the settings. And for now, we just pass in a value cookie policy accept non-trackers. will do for now, and then the other parameter is tracking categories, and this needs an array, so let's create one. Tracking categories. Well, we probably don't want an array just yet here, since we need to fill this up first. So let's create a list, and then we create an array from that. Okay, and now we only need to look at our settings like this code did before, and then add the categories. Let's quickly take a look how Phoenix did this, because the code in Focus was used for GeckoView directly, and we need to do what our engine component, the abstraction on top, expects. So we just need to add those things to the list. Okay, that should be easy. So let's copy those over too. We know the names. And then we can use this block that used to be here before. We don't need all the else cases. The previous code needed to build some kind of bit map. Okay. And we need access to the settings object. Let's see, I think that is a singleton. Let's see, settings. Settings.getInstance. And that, did we import the wrong one? Why does this not work? Oh yeah, was the wrong settings object. Settings, this one, get instance, and we already have a context here, I think. Yeah, we just need to pass it into this method. From here, okay, and if we should block social trackers, then we, okay, first we need a mutable list, otherwise we can't add anything. Then we add tracking protection policy category social. And if we want to block ad trackers, we add the ad category. And if we want to block analytics trackers, and then other trackers. What is other trackers? We didn't specify this here. Let's go to the Focus code again. Other trackers are content trackers. Do we have a category content trackers? Yeah, okay, awesome. So remove the comments we added. This. Okay. So now we create a tracking protection policy based on whatever the user selected, and then we pass it into the engine, and then it blocks the right category. So this is nice. Now we need to also look at the situation where we are already browsing and we change some of those settings. So we need to somewhere register. I guess if you follow the code that exists before, we need to register some listener that looks for those chat preference changes, and then we create a new policy and tell the runtime, or the engine in this case. I wonder what's the best place for that. Ideally, we have access to this code again to just call this again. What we could do, yeah, but I'm still not sure where we place the code, but we could start, at least to make it work, add a function here, update tracking protection policy, and whenever someone calls this, we create a new policy by calling the method we just created, create tracking protection policy. We need a context, and then we get our engine object, get the settings object, and then set the new policy. Policy. Let's look into what this does. And Gecko engine settings. We end up in this base class that is not the one we are actually interested in here. Let's see, Gecko engine. No. Let's look at Phoenix again. Where are we using this? Okay. This looks promising. So in different places where Phoenix allows to change this setting, Phoenix is Firefox Preview, by the way, we call into this use case. And this use case does this for us. Let's go back to components class. This is the singleton and keeps references to our global components like the engine. And let's see where this is coming from. Use cases, settings, use cases. Settings, use cases. From the feature session component. Okay, that is something we have in here too. Settings, use cases. Let's create a global instance here. Settings, use cases. So use cases are classes that exist in our components that allow us to pass those objects around and have functionality like, hey, please update the tracking protection policy on all our tabs wrapped in this object, and then provide just a nice method that we can call to, so that we do not need to actually care in our apps how we can update all the tabs manually. And let's see, this needs engine settings, and I wonder how they get inserted into this use cases class. Use cases. Okay, this is here. We create those in Phoenix, and they are on core.engine.settings. Okay. This is engine.settings, and it also needs a session manager, the thing that knows about all the tabs. Now if we look into this class quickly, if we like want to update the tracking protection policy of all our sessions, then we just need to call into this use case and do not need to do this ourselves. So back to engine provider. No, not engine provider, sorry, components. And we wrote this update tracking protection policy thing. Now we only need to call settings use cases update tracking protection and pass in our new policy. Great. Now we just need to make sure that this gets called. And the question is, where do we do this? The old focus code did this here, update blocking, and that was done in inside the view, which now doesn't make any sense anymore, because we are no longer dependent on a view. The engine always exists in the process, and whenever something changes the policy, we need to tell the engine. So we probably need some kind of global listener. The question is, where does this start? Where do we register the preference listener? Maybe in the application object. Is this a good place? Do we want to do this here? Whenever the app launches, we register this thing that listens to shared preference changes, and whenever there are interesting things that change the blocking or the tracking protection policy, then we tell the engine to perform those changes. Sounds like a good start, I guess. Like with the other things, we can still move this later. Do we have access to those shared preferences from the application object? What is the code again for doing this? Get the preference, default shared preferences, and then register listen. Okay. Let's do this here too. We get the default shared preference from the application object, and then register a shared preferences change listener. And I don't think this should live inside the application object itself, so maybe we create a separate object. And how could we call this? This is going to be a class that listens to all shared preferences that somehow affect the engine and configures the engine according to the new shared preferences. So how could we call this? Like engine shared preferences listener. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect right now. Right now we care about the functionality, and at the end can find better names, move code, and so on. For now, it's the engine shared preference listener. And we need to implement the shared preferences on shared preferences change listener. Get the preferences and the key, I guess. On shared preferences changed, yeah. The shared preferences and the key, and they are not actually nullable like Android Studio guesses from the Java code. And then we can almost do the same as here. For now, we only care about the content blocking or tracking protection settings. But similar like this code here, we will probably need to extend this later on. And we need to pass in the context because the shared preference keys are defined in string files. Okay, and then whenever this is one of those, then we call context. We get the components. We call update tracking protection policy with the context. Yeah. I mean, this is not the best place to have this method inside the components object because the components object is just a holder or a tree or a thing that keeps references to all kinds of components or singletons in a more generic way. So we don't want methods like this on the object itself, but right now this is like just nice place since we need access to the things in here. We need access to this method from in here, at least to the create tracking protection policy method, and we need access to it from outside. So yeah, for now I guess it can just live there. Something to potentially clean up once we have fixed all the things. Okay, so why is this complaining? Okay, we need one more brace here. Okay. And now we need to register this here, pass in the context. And in theory, this works now. Let's see, we could set a breakpoint here. And we expect to get into create tracking protection policy into this method once on app start to configure the engine, and a second time whenever we change setting here. So let's try this. Run a debug build. Okay, this is the first call. Let's resume. Okay, the engine is configured. Now let's browse to some page. The Verge is our test page for today. And then we change some settings. I want those trackers off. Okay, did not get called our code. So what did we miss? If we go into update tracking protection policy, then we should also end up here. So let's go back into on shared preference changed. May we never end up here. Set a breakpoint here. Okay, first call to create policy. Now we change some settings. Okay, so we know we never end up in our listener. That is interesting. So for this listener, nothing has changed, but we called register here and passed in the engine shared preference listener on the default shared preferences. Let's go back to the old Focus code. That is exactly how Focus did it previously. Inside the view, we ask for the default shared preferences and then register listener. In the new version, we do the same, but from the application object. So get default shared preferences returns the gets a shared preference instant that points to the default file that is used by the preference framework in the given context. So I can only assume this means that we are looking at the different shared preferences in the application object. Is this the case? Possible? Previously we did it on the view, and the view always existed inside the browser fragment, and the browser fragment always existed in the which activity is it? The main activity, I guess. Let's see what happens if we do this, but inside the main activity, and see if this triggers here. Let's do it in create for now. Okay, let's test. I didn't run as debug. Okay, first call to create policy. Let's change some settings. Yeah, still does not get invoked. Okay, I am officially confused. The main activity, we moved it to the main activity. Is the main activity actually the right place? I think it is. Yeah, that's where we show the browser. How did this work previously then? Oh, there's one interesting difference though. Shared ones. Yeah, we are using the Android Preference Manager, and here we are actually using the one from Android X. And I'm not sure why we're doing this. Or what's the actual difference here, but let's try this again with the normal Preference Manager and let's read some code or docs. Why is there a Preference Manager in Android X? Okay, initial call. Now we go to settings. Still does not get invoked. Register. Ask the preference manager to get the default shared preference. Does this trigger for anything else we do here? Okay, this is not actually a setting. No, it does not look like it does. Okay, what is happening here? Like the line before actually modifies the settings. I wonder if we move this up. Now we register shared preference change listener before we changed them. So, and we are changing exactly the same thing. So now I definitely expect this to get. Debug. Okay, this is called to create policy. Okay, and now we end up in the on-shared preference changed listeners as expected. Awesome. So why does a change of those things here not trigger it? Maybe we need to look at the fragment again that actually performs those changes, but let's new first. One more test. Flip some. Okay, now we end up here. Did I actually change anything? Except the order of things? And yeah, I'm confused. Why is it now working? Back to the main activity. The only thing I did is I moved this up, right? So if I, and now I did run, not debug. Debug. Resume. Go to the settings and some switches. Now it does not get called. Does this make any sense? I get the default chat preferences. Is a listener, and why does it matter if I edit them before or after registering? Why does this matter? Let's look at the docs. Am I missing something obvious here? Get default. Okay, this actually tells us to use Android X. That is already interesting, but let's look at this method. There's another thing we could try. And that is, since we are reading settings from this, preferences from the settings object, that's also what we use for configuring the policy, we could register our listener in here. And let's see if this is triggered by the same instance. So internally in the settings object, whenever we create the shared preferences instance that we look at, we also register the listener on it. And then it's at least the same instance we are also reading from. Still have the breakpoint here. Do we also have the breakpoint in components? Yeah, okay. Let's run this with the debugger again. Okay, this is where we create the tracking protection policy. Now I change the settings. It's not getting triggered. Weird. So what I wonder is this even working when we are reading the flags? So let's say we only enable social trackers. Okay. And now we deploy this. And let's see. Okay, we are adding social trackers, we are adding those, and this is actually not reading the settings. Not reading the same settings. Or is it? Oh, no, sorry, I'm sorry, it is. We only added the social category. So this is working. We're correctly reading those here. And at this point, well, there's at least one thing that doesn't make sense. We are getting this, we are asking for the shared preference instance again here. We want to register on the same instance. Try this one time. With the debugger. Okay, resume. It's not get triggered. I start to not trust the debugger actually. Just to make sure I'm not insane, I will add a log statement here. The key. And also to tracking protection policy. And we can look at KitKat again and filter. Okay, we see, interesting, we already got invoked once and the debugger never showed us. We created tracking protection policy and we received one change already. Let's see. Actually working. We get the preference change and we create a new policy. So that's the best kind of debugging, searching an error that doesn't even exist. Usually I actually never use the debugger and always log. And since I don't have that much screen real estate here and I want to do everything inside Android Studio in the stream, I thought I used the debugger. Okay. So back, let's remove the logs again. So we are correctly updating the policy. At least there's one positive outcome, and that's we moved the shared preference listener to the settings object. And that part I guess I'm happy about, because it makes sense to have this here where we also read settings. And we could maybe now try to move this create tracking protection policy thing also to the settings. Since that also makes a lot of sense. We have this object that we read settings from and we can ask it to, hey, create a tracking protection policy from your settings. And see if we move this here and then in components we call into settings, get instance, and then create tracking protection policy. Yeah, I like that. And then the update no longer needs to be here. We can move this maybe inside our listener. And don't need to pass in the context anymore. And then we say settings, get instance, and then please create a tracking protection policy. This method actually no longer needs a context because it already has the context, right? Oh no, it does not. Okay, then for now let's keep it here. And then we need our components from the context and call into the settings use cases and say update tracking protection policy. See if this compiles. So we did a lot of unnecessary debugging because the debugger didn't work, but at least we found a new place for the code and this looks a little bit nicer now already. Okay, it compiles. So we've seen that it kind of works from the code, but we haven't actually tested this. We don't know if the engine actually applied these settings. And I think there was a test page where we could test this, but I don't remember where it was or what the URL is of the test page. So I will just add a to do and we will try to find it later. Test tracking protection on test page. And then I just saw, like, we try to get the settings object here, which doesn't make any sense because we are inside the settings object, so we can just follow those methods directly. Awesome. And then we also don't need to pass in a context anymore. And then we can move this here. And here. Let's see if this still runs. Okay, cool. So we can check off this. We set the correct tracking policy now. We have another item on our to-do list to actually test this and create and update tracking. A cookie policy is something we can move up here. Okay. Let's do a quick search on the Android components repository if we can find this test page. Test page. Let's see if any one of those contains the page for testing. No. Okay, can't find it right now. That's something for next time. Okay, let's go back to the PR. Yeah, still a bunch of things to do, but we managed to check off 2 or 3 things today. I think that's quite nice. Let's make sure we commit this and push it to this PR. All right, I think that is everything I want to do on this project for today. Thank you everyone who watched this. Please follow if you want to see more of that, if you want to see different things or more of specific things, please let me know too. So yeah, see you maybe tomorrow. Bye bye.